Day and Gauguin arrived in the bustling port of Masulipatam, a central trading hub of the Vijayanagara Empire. They came with ambitions to establish a foothold in the region to secure their trade interests and compete with other European powers vying for control over these lucrative waters. Negotiations with the local Nayak rulers were complex. After months of discussions and an exchange of gifts, a deal was struck. The British East India Company secured a tract of land, a mere stretch of coastal dunes and palm trees, which they intended to develop into a trading post. The company could have spent more time with a modest parcel of land under their control. They began constructing a humble trading post consisting of a few warehouses and shelters for traders. The initial goal was to facilitate the exchange of goods, primarily textiles, spices, and precious metals, between the Indian subcontinent and England. The site was named Fort St. George as a nod to England's patron saint, St. George. The name held religious significance and underscored the company's intent to establish a lasting presence. As trade flourished, so did the security concerns. The shifting alliances and rivalries among European powers in the region, such as the Portuguese and Dutch, prompted the company to rethink the nature of its trading post. The simple structures began to transform into more substantial buildings, and defensive walls started to encircle the settlement. This transformation was more than just a matter of protection. It was a tangible manifestation of the company's growing ambitions. Fort St. George was becoming more than just a trading post. It was a strategic center of influence. While back in the Isle of Ireland, the Irish Catholics were forced to give up their lands to British and Scottish settlers. These lands were redistributed to English-speaking Protestants, with the remainder going to deserving native Irish lords and clans. So naturally, this led to an Irish rebellion in 1641. A faction of the Irish gentry, led by figures like Rory O'More and Sir Phelim O'Neill, attempted a coup in Dublin. The plan was to seize Dublin Castle, a symbol of English power, but the plot was discovered, forcing the conspirators to act prematurely, leading to ultimate failure. However, O'Neill and the Catholics were not done. In November 1641, the rebels tried to attack the town of Lisnagarvey, but failed. Upset and angry, they lashed out in Portadown, a town that was once home to the McCann clan, that was now resettled with new settlers. The Irish forces managed to overpower the British defenses, and in the aftermath, anger got the best of the British. On that chilling day, the Irish forced the Protestant prisoners to a wooden bridge that was intentionally broken in the middle. The Protestant prisoners were stripped and forced off the bridge into the cold river below. Those who tried to swim to safety were shot with muskets. It's estimated that around 100 settlers met this grim fate at the bridge, their cries echoing long after the waters had silenced them. In retaliation, in Island Magee, 24 Catholics were murdered in retaliation. The arrival of a Scottish Covenanter army in Ulster in April 1642 led to further such atrocities. On Rathlin Island, Scottish soldiers from Clan Campbell were encouraged by their commanding officer, Sir Duncan Campbell, to kill the local Catholic MacDonalds, who were related to the Campbells' enemies in Scotland, Clan MacDonald. They threw hundreds of MacDonald women over cliffs to their deaths. The killings were brought under some degree of control by Owen Roe O'Neill, who in July 1642 was given command of Irish forces in Ulster and hanged several rebels for attacking civilians. There was no unity among the Catholic leaders. They all acted upon their will. In order to win a war, you need to work together. So that's when all the Catholic leaders met in Kilkelly, where the Confederate Catholics of Ireland were born. Their goal was clear: to create an Irish Catholic state loyal to the English King Charles I, but autonomous in its functioning, because they knew it was their best chance for peace. The Confederation crafted its own governmental structure: an assembly to debate and make decisions, a council to oversee administrative functions, and a military arm to protect their interests. One of the Confederation's defining moments was the creation of an oath. This oath symbolized their dual loyalty to the Catholic Church and King Charles I. Members swore to uphold the rights of the Church in Ireland, ensuring its prominence and protection. Within a few months of the rebellion's outbreak, almost all Catholic gentry joined it. Local lords and landowners raised armed units of their dependents to control the violence that engulfed the country, fearing that after the settlers were gone, the Irish peasantry would also turn on them. Secondly, the Long Parliament, the Irish administration, and King Charles made it clear that Irish Catholics who did not demonstrate their loyalty would be held responsible for the rebellion and killings of settlers and would confiscate their lands as stated in the Adventurers Act of 1642. This apparent act of appeasement would not last though, as the British Isles were now at war. On the fateful day of January 4, 1642, King Charles attempted to arrest 5 members of Parliament. These 5 members, John Pym, John Hampden, Denzil Hollis, Arthur Hasselrig, and William Strode, were known for opposing the king's policies and support for parliamentary rights. Charles I accused them of treason and other offenses, which led to a standoff between the king and Parliament. On June 4, 1642, Parliament members sent a demand letter to King Charles called the 19 Propositions, which would reform how Parliament and the monarchy would work. Parliament would grow in power if passed, while the monarchy would be weakened. Within the propositions, Parliament is demanding various line items, such as number 2, matters that concern the public must be debated in Parliament, not decided based upon the advice of private advisors. 6. Laws against Jesuits, Catholic priests, and Catholic recusants must be strictly enforced. 7. The vote of Catholic lords shall be taken away, and the children of Catholics must receive a Protestant education. 18. Charles must clear the 5 members of the House of Commons, along with Lord Kimbolton, of any wrongdoing. Though the Catholics in the Irish Confederation may be loyal to Charles, Parliament was angered by Charles's blatant disregard for the Anglican Church, so they demanded he change his stance. In response, Charles would write, "For all these reasons to all these demands, our answer is nolumus leges Angliae mutari. We are unwilling to change the laws of England." With tensions escalating, both sides began to gather support and muster their forces. By autumn, the rolling countryside near Edgehill became the stage for a pivotal clash between the royalist forces loyal to King Charles I and the parliamentarian troops supporting the cause of parliamentary supremacy. As the sun rose on October 23rd, the two sides arrayed against each other in a tense and charged atmosphere. The royalist cavalry, led by Prince Rupert of the Rhine, was known for their daring and fearless charges. On the opposite, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, a seasoned general, commanded the parliamentarians. Rupert's cavaliers launched a ferocious charge that shattered the parliamentarian left flank as the battle commenced. The royalists gained the upper hand. However, the royalist infantry was unable to capitalize on the cavalry's success. The parliamentarian forces, while in disarray, managed to regroup and counterattack. The battle raged with fierce hand-to-hand combat, pitting brother against brother and friend against friend. But yet, after 2 days of fighting, there was no decisive winner. The war was set in motion, with neither side willing to relent. The following year, the Royalists, buoyed by early optimism, tasted victory. In the south, at Braddock Down, they swiftly defeated the parliamentarians. Further success followed at Stratton, consolidating their hold over Cornwall. Riding this wave, Prince Rupert showcased his military prowess at Chalgrove Field, even though the event was marred by the death of the parliamentarian icon, John Hampden. The royalist cause seemed unstoppable, and this was further confirmed with their victories at Adwalden Moor and Roundway Down. By the end of the year, even the key city of Bristol had fallen into their hands. However, 1644 marked a shift. The parliamentarians, learning from their defeats, mounted a challenge. Their efforts culminated at Marston Moor, a vast expanse that bore witness to a dramatic turnaround. Here, under the watchful eyes of generals like Oliver Cromwell, the royalist forces faced a crushing defeat, relinquishing their grip over the north. Later that year, the two sides met again at the First Battle of Newbury. Much like Edgehill, neither could claim an outright win. However, a turning point was on the horizon, the Battle of Naseby. As dawn broke on June 14, 1645, a palpable tension filled the air. Both armies faced each other, a mere few miles apart. The Royalists, confident and seasoned from earlier victories, anticipated another win. The parliamentarians, however, had been reorganizing and were now more formidable than ever, especially with Oliver Cromwell's new model army, a force known for its discipline and strategic prowess. The battle commenced with the customary roar of cannons, sending plumes of smoke into the morning sky. Initially, the Royalists seemed to have the upper hand, with their horsemen charging effectively against the parliamentarian flanks. But Cromwell, with his strategic acumen, had a card up his sleeve: his Ironsides, a cavalry regiment known for its staunch discipline and unwavering courage. As the Royalist cavalry believed they were gaining ground, they were met with a fierce countercharge by the Ironsides. The parliamentarians, with resounding shouts and unparalleled coordination, began to turn the tide. Cromwell's forces pushed back, cutting through the Royalist ranks, capturing King Charles himself and making him a prisoner. Charles was later put on trial for high treason. In Westminster Hall, Charles I defended his actions, but the trial ended with a guilty verdict. On a winter morning, the fallen monarch faced the executioner's blade, marking the shift from absolutism to a new era of governance, the era of Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan and, like his brethren in Massachusetts, believed that the Anglican Church was corrupted by Charles and the way of the Royalists. So, in the new Parliament, known as the Rump Parliament, Cromwell was able to be a general to attack the Irish Confederacy. In his mind, the Catholic belief was denying the primacy of the Bible and needed to be quelled. After he landed in Dublin on August 15, 1649, Cromwell took the fortified port towns of Drogheda and Wexford to secure logistical supplies from England. At the siege of Drogheda in September 1649, his troops killed nearly 3,500 people after the town's capture. Around 2,700 Royalist soldiers, including some civilians, prisoners, and Roman Catholic priests. In October, another massacre took place in Wexford and killed 2,000 Irish troops and 1,500 Irish civilians. Wexford was burned to ashes. Cromwell left Ireland in May 1650 after Scotland proclaimed declaring Charles II, the son of Charles I, to be king. With this act of so-called treason, Cromwell felt the only action was war. On September 3, 1650, unexpectedly, Cromwell smashed the main Scottish army at the Battle of Dunbar, killing 4,000 Scottish soldiers, taking another 10,000 prisoners, and then capturing the Scottish capital of Edinburgh. The following year, Charles II and his Scottish allies attempted to invade England and capture London, while Cromwell was engaged in Scotland. Cromwell followed them south and caught them at Worcester on September 3, 1651, and his forces destroyed the last major Scottish royalist army at the Battle of Worcester. Under the generals Henry Ireton and Edmund Ludlow back in Ireland, the Irish were sieged into oblivion. The last Catholic-held town, Galway, surrendered in April 1652, and the latest Irish Catholic troops capitulated in April 1653 in County Cavan. In the wake of the Commonwealth's conquest of the island of Ireland, the public practice of Roman Catholicism was banned, and Catholic priests were killed when captured. All Catholic-owned land was confiscated under the Act for the Settlement of Ireland of 1652, and given to Scottish and English settlers, Parliament's financial creditors, and parliamentary soldiers. Presbyterianism was deemed illegal in Scotland, and they were forced to be a part of the Anglican Church. Oliver Cromwell was decorated as Lord Protectorate in 1653. With his position, he tried to make the rest of the British Isles more like England. He hated the Scottish clan system up in the partial jungle of the Highlands, so he destroyed it. Before Cromwell, there was no idea of land ownership in the Highlands. A clan would live on the land, and together they would survive off the resources communally. Together, they would have a chief. However, that would often change. However, Cromwell gave the titles of land to these chiefs, saying that they individually owned the land rather than the whole group. This, in turn, created a Scottish noble class of those who arbitrarily got the deed to the land and built a castle of impoverished, non-land-owning Scotsmen. This changed the entire function of Scottish society. The landowners wanted to make a profit rather than survive as a community. Following English ideals, the landowners wanted to make as much profit as humanly possible. So they started cutting down giant swaths of Scottish trees. This once prospering rainforest turned into a hilly, grassy field seemingly overnight. Then came the sheep. Over time, with these bare grass mountainous fields, the landowners realized they could make more profit by raising sheep than by farming. So, sheep were given endless land to graze, while the old clan members were forced to work parts of the land and were impoverished. Cromwell thought that making Scotland more English would be more civilized and enlightened, that English society is just so perfect that it must be spread all across the world to truly help those people who live in a world filled with cultural differences, that the English way is the only way. Cromwell thought he was doing Scotland a favor, but some see it as he ruined their entire society instead. He wouldn't be the last Brit to do just that. While most of Cromwell focused on the British Isles, he still wanted to have control against the Spanish in South America. So, he launched the Western Design Armada in the Caribbean. In April 1655, General Robert Venables led the English Armada in an attack on Spain's fort at Santo Domingo, Hispaniola. However, the Spanish quickly defended against this poorly executed siege of Santo Domingo, and the English troops were soon decimated by disease. Venables, not wanting to be a failure, went to the only Spanish colony in the area that did not have defensive capabilities, the sparsely populated island of Jamaica. In May 1655, around 7,000 English soldiers landed near Jamaica's Spanish town capital. The English invasion force soon overwhelmed the 2,500 residents, and it became an English colony. Of course, the Spanish wanted to regain the island, but were ultimately never able to gain a foothold in the island. Cromwell used the island to send prisoners of war and anyone who disobeyed his rule by making them indentured servants, forced to help grow the island's sugarcane production. However, tropical disease and harsh conditions made it hard for the colony to grow. In the year 1660, the reign of Cromwell was over, and the colonization race was on under new leadership. King Charles II was given power, and the British monarchy was restored. Charles II was dead set on bringing England to the rest of the world. In Africa, he established the Company of Royal Adventures trading into Africa. Charles II granted the company a complete monopoly of the gold trade and, in 1663, access to the ever-lucrative slave trade. While in the Americas, Charles established the province of Carolina, which he named after himself. The charter gave 8 English nobles land access to lands that were part of modern-day Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. It was set up to be a buffer between the growing Spanish land grab in the swamps of Florida. Back in Africa, the English weren't the only ones trying to pillage Africa for their resources. The Dutch had established many settlements across the lucrative coast, and the English did not like it. Captain Robert Holmes was given authority to take over any Dutch fort he could. So, on January 22, 1664, he took the fort of Gorée. On March 28th, he took over Walcheren. On April 10th, he captured the principal Dutch base, Cape Coast Castle, in West Africa. Slightly after, in America, the English were looking to overtake the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, situated on the southern tip of Manhattan. On May 25, 1664, Colonel Richard Nicolls set out from Portsmouth with 4 warships and 300 soldiers. When they arrived on August 27th, he sent Dutch Director Governor Peter Stuyvesant a letter of lenient terms of surrender. The Dutch colonists would still be guaranteed possession of their property rights, enjoyment of religious freedom, and that all pubs would remain open. They would not have to follow the puritanical rules of Massachusetts. Rather, they would be their own colony. The people of New Amsterdam accepted, and the colony was renamed to New York. The Dutch in Europe were unhappy with this English conquering, so they sent out experienced naval Lieutenant Admiral Michael de Ruyter to defeat the English. First, he started in Africa, where he quickly reconquered all former Dutch forts the English conquered, except Cape Coast. After that, he sailed over to the Americas. In April 1665, he arrived off the coast of Barbados, destroying various English ships on the way. However, his army was weakened, and even though he was ordered to retake New York, he knew that his fleet could not handle it. Fighting that battle would result in imminent death, so in 1665, he went back to the Netherlands. In 1667, the Treaty of Breda was signed, where the English would have an absolute claim of the former New Netherlands, while the Dutch would regain control of the colony Suriname, which is in South America. With the Netherlands out of the picture, the path to further colonization in the Americas was at its forefront, but it wasn't without its controversies. Because up in the no-man's land of Canada lay the unambitious French colony of Montreal. The French were more hesitant to expand outside their predefined areas. They had their places where they would hunt furs, and they were to stay on that path. The French sustained all their colonial efforts from fur trading, which was in high demand in Europe. However, 2 French fur traders, Pierre Esprit Radisson and Maître de Grossières, learned from the native Cree peoples that the ultimate place for premium fur pellets was in the north and west of Lake Superior. The duo knew their opportunity, and if they wanted to be rich, they would have to go against the will of the French. As they set off into this mysterious land, most thought they wouldn't make it. But when they returned a year later to Montreal with premium furs, evidence of the potential of the Hudson Bay region, they were arrested by French authorities for trading without a license and fined, and their furs were confiscated by the government. Determined to establish trade in the Hudson Bay area, Radisson and Grossières approached a group of English colonial merchants in Boston, Massachusetts, to help finance their explorations. Eventually, the two met and gained the sponsorship of Prince Rupert, the cousin of King Charles II. In 1668, the English expedition acquired 2 ships, the Nonsuch and the Eaglet, to explore possible trade into Hudson Bay. Grossières sailed on the Nonsuch, commanded by Captain Zachariah Gillam, while the Eaglet was commanded by Captain William Stannard and accompanied by Radisson. On June 5, 1668, both ships left port at Deptford, England, but the Eaglet was forced to turn back off the coast of Ireland. The Nonsuch continued to James Bay, the southern portion of Hudson Bay, where its explorers founded in 1668 the first fort on Hudson Bay, Charles Fort, at the mouth of the Rupert River. After a successful trading expedition over the winter of 1669, Nonsuch returned to England on October 9, 1669, with the first cargo of fur resulting from trade in Hudson Bay. The bulk of this haul was sold to London's most prominent furrier, Thomas Glover, for £1,233. Calculating for inflation, the value of the furs would be worth $188,000 in today's pounds. After establishing viability and profitability in the company, King Charles II granted a monopoly over the region drained by all rivers and streams flowing into Hudson Bay to the Hudson Bay Company, a company that still exists today. While back in New England, the English colony started to grow at an increasingly accelerated rate. In 1624, the Massachusetts Bay Colony only was home to 180 people. Now, in 1675, it was the home of 64,000. With more people, the demand for more space, resources, and food increased. So, the colonists began expanding outside their tiny settlements to produce what they needed. Their de facto capital, Plymouth, was right in the center of the ancestral lands of the Wampanoag Confederacy, a Native American tribe. At first, the Wampanoag were friendly towards pilgrims, but their relationship began to sour over time. They tried to negotiate territorial boundaries. However, their fundamental differences in how land and property worked made it nearly impossible. The English viewed land as something an individual with the right deed could own, while the natives believed land was a communal resource to be shared for all. So, when the English tried to buy land from the natives, it was met with confusion and a lack of understanding. For all the Wampanoag knew, their new neighbors stole their land unjustly. In 1675, a single event ignited the powder keg. 3 Wampanoag men were executed by English authorities accused of the murder of a Christianized Native American named John Sassamon. This series of executions caused outrage among the Wampanoags, led by Metacom, with the English name of King Philip. Metacom led his warriors and attacked the Plymouth colony, starting at Swansea and going to Taunton, Brookfield, and Deerfield. The winter months did little to quell the conflict. Both sides endured harsh conditions, facing disease, starvation, and exposure. Battles raged, with Native American tribes joining Metacom's alliance against the colonists. The English launched counterattacks, leading to the infamous Battle of Great Swamp, where a Narragansett fort was captured with heavy casualties on both sides. As the conflict escalated, alliances shifted like sand in the wind. English authorities negotiated a treaty with the Mohawk tribe, hoping to gain a strategic advantage against Metacom's forces. Native American villages were razed, lives lost, and families torn apart. Metacom's leadership kept the alliance together, but his death in 1676 marked a turning point. He was assassinated by one of his best friends, John Alderman, who was known as the Praying Indian because of his Christian beliefs. With Metacom's death, the Native American alliance faltered, resistance dwindled, and the war began to wind down. In August 1676, the war officially ended, leaving both Native American communities and English settlements devastated. Lives were lost, property destroyed, and cultures forever altered. The war ended with the Treaty of Casco, which allowed the English to remain on all native lands. However, they were required to pay a light tribute of 1 peck of corn per English family settled on native land. A peck is equivalent to 2 dry gallons, or 16 dry pints, a relatively insignificant amount for the farmers of Massachusetts Bay. While back in England, another religious group was challenging the tenets of Anglicanism, the Quakers. One of their most controversial ideas was the concept of inner light, which states that there is a divine spark within each individual that allows for direct communication with God, without needing a state-appointed bishop or a king. They also rejected all formal titles, spanning from Your Highness to Mother. Every Quaker was to be referred to by their first name regardless of status. King Charles would be referred to as Charles. Quaker kids would call their mother by their first name. This mere concept of rejecting hierarchical titles put them on the outskirts of British society. So, William Penn made it his mission to find a place for his church to go. It also helped that King Charles II was indebted to William Penn's father for £16,000, or £2.8 million today. Instead of receiving cash, William Penn asked for land in the New World to house his fellow Quakers. On March 4, 1681, Charles signed the order, creating the colony of Pennsylvania. When William Penn arrived at his colony on the ship Welcome in October 1682, he went to a tiny settlement and named it in Greek Phileo Adelphos, which would translate into English, the city of brotherly love. A city where all people, regardless of race, creed, religion, or gender, could prosper. A place where no one would be unfairly prosecuted. A place, in theory, where a white man and a black man could shake hands as equals. As Penn would refer to it, this was a holy experiment, because he believed in a famous Quaker tenet that all people are equal under the eyes of God. However, the English Empire was in turmoil once again after King Charles II died in 1685. His successor, James II, was a staunch Roman Catholic who took the throne. He thought it was important to grant rights of religious freedom across the land. However, the Anglican majority were livid when James appointed Catholics to powerful positions, violating the Test Act, which made that very act illegal to do so. But the birth of an heir truly set the kingdom on edge. James's second wife, Mary of Modena, bore him a son, a Catholic heir who threatened to establish a line of monarchs devoted to the Catholic faith. Fears of a Catholic dynasty ran rampant, shaking the Protestant establishment's core. In the shadows, a group of nobles and political leaders known as the Immortal Seven whispered their concerns. They felt the kingdom was hurling towards absolutism, with the monarchy overshadowing the power of Parliament and the rule of law. They knew something had to be done to protect their beliefs. Their hopes turned to Prince William of Orange, James's Protestant son-in-law, to quell his father-in-law's desire for religious acceptance. In 1688, William's fleet sailed to the shores of England. His arrival was met with a surprising lack of resistance, as many of James's supporters defected to his side. James II's grasp on power weakened as his supporters dwindled. Fearing for his safety, he fled to France in the dead of night, leaving a kingdom in turmoil and an uncertain future. With the throne vacant, William and Mary, Protestantism's chosen protectors, accepted the leadership mantle. Parliament seized the moment to enact lasting change. In 1689, they passed the Bill of Rights, a cornerstone of constitutional principles that established the supremacy of Parliament over the monarchy, curbed the monarch's power, and protected individual rights. However, once the news spread to America, the Protestants were ready to revolt. In April 1689, news of the Glorious Revolution in England reached the American colonies. Protestant settlers in New York revolted against the Catholic governor, Jacob Leisler, seizing control of Fort James. They established a provisional government in the name of William and Mary. Around the same time in Massachusetts, the English in Boston overthrew the Catholic governor, Sir Edmund Andros, who had imposed unpopular policies. They arrested Andros and restored their previous political structure, declaring loyalty to William and Mary. The French Catholics, seeing this as an attack on their faith and the will of the papacy, decided to fight back. However, much to France's surprise, most of Europe was pinned against them. England, the Dutch Republic, the Holy Roman Empire, and Spain were all aligned to stop the French in what was referred to as the Grand Alliance. On a bloody day in 1690, the Battle of Fleurus saw the French secure victory against the Grand Alliance forces in the Spanish Netherlands. This battle solidified France's hold on key territories in the region. Across the seas in Ireland, the Battle of the Boyne marked a clash between the forces of the deposed Catholic King James II and those of his Protestant successor, King William III. William emerged victorious, securing his hold on the English and Irish thrones. However, the war was not just a European battle. It spanned the entire world. In 1690, a series of clashes erupted, including the Battle of Port Royal. English forces attempted to capture the French stronghold in Acadia, present-day Nova Scotia, but their efforts were thwarted. French and Abenaki forces launched raids against English settlements in the province of Maine, sowing fear and uncertainty among the settlers. Battles like the Siege of Pemaquid showcased the complexities of alliances, as indigenous tribes aligned with European powers to further their interests. In the Battle of Quebec, saw an English expedition attempt to capture the critical French stronghold in Canada. Despite their efforts, the English forces were unsuccessful in their endeavor, creating a firm boundary between the two nations' colonies. On September 20th, 1697, the Treaty of Ryswick was signed, marking the end of the 9 Years' War. In this treaty, it was officially declared that William of Orange was the leader of England. It also stopped the French offensive. While the 9-year was underway in Europe and the Americas, the English were in their first war in India. Because at the time, the English East India Company had a trade monopoly in the area. The company wanted to obtain ownership of Chittagong, establish a fortified enclave throughout the region, and attain independence of the surrounding Soba from the Mughal territory by bringing the local governors and the Hooghly River to their control. However, Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb refused these desired English terms. So, the East India Company Navy blockaded several Mughal ports on the western coast of India and engaged the Mughal army in battle. The blockade started to affect cities like Chittagong, Madras, and Bombay, which resulted in the intervention of Emperor Aurangzeb, who seized all the factories of the company and arrested members of the East India Company army. In 1690, the Mughal fleet from Hindhira, commanded by Sidi Yaqub, blockaded the East India Company fort in Bombay. After a year of resistance and famine in the fort, the company surrendered, and the company sent envoys to Aurangzeb's court to plead for a pardon and to renew the trade. The company's envoys had to prostrate themselves before the emperor paid a hefty imperial fine of 150,000 rupees, the equivalent of 4.4 million today. Emperor Aurangzeb then ordered Sidi Yaqub to lift the siege of Bombay, and the company subsequently re-established itself in Bombay and set up a new base in Calcutta. While back over in England, when Queen Anne took over for William in 1702, the structure of the government within the British Isles was quite unique. There were 4 kingdoms, 3 parliaments, and 1 monarch. Scotland had their own parliament and set of laws, while they were still under the power of the British monarch. Ireland also had their own parliament with statutes and still abiding the British monarch. England and Wales shared a parliament, as Wales was more assimilated into English culture. That, of course, still followed the British monarch. In 1707, though, Scotland was dealing with the economic turmoil of corruption, resource depletion, and an increasingly powerful elite. The wealthy knew that they could increase their power if they combined parliament. Many Scottish officials were bribed, such as Earl of Glasgow, David Boyle, and 2nd Duke of Queensberry, James Douglas, who received around £20,000, £4 million today, to end the Scottish Parliament. The poor hated this, but they were ignored. So on May 1st, 1707, the Scottish and English Parliament combined to form the Parliament of Great Britain, based in the Palace of Westminster, which housed the Old English Parliament. As any semblance of Scottish independence was gone, anger spread throughout Scotland, but nothing was done about it. However, for England, this uniting of Parliament created the term Great Britain, was the beginning of the empire. Though the Treaty of Ryswick was designed to keep the peace between England and France, it was short-lived. In 1707, they were again fighting over the colonies in America due to a succession issue in Spain. The Spanish King Charles II was dying of ill health without any children. 2 rival claims emerged to seize the Spanish crown: Archduke Charles of Austria, a Habsburg scion, and Philip of Anjou, a Bourbon prince and possible successor to France's King Louis XIV. The English feared a united French and Spanish throne because it would increase Catholicism's power worldwide. So the English staunchly declared war. Even though this war started about who should be king of Spain, it ended by restructuring European colonization. The first battle on American soil was in Fort Albany, where French commander Claude de Ramsay and his men wanted to knock out the English trading post. Fort Albany's wooden walls and palisades stood as barriers, separating the defenders from the impending storm. Inside the fort, English traders and soldiers braced for the confrontation that was about to unfold. But the fort was no match to heavy French cannon fire and was later surrendered to the French. However, the English weren't done, because English and French settlers wrestled over territorial boundaries in the rugged wilderness of Acadia. Upon leaving England, commanders Francis Nicholson and Samuel Vetch came to Acadia to gain the territory for the crown. Upon the rocky shores of Port Royal, the battle for dominance unfolded. English warships loomed on the horizon, their cannons primed and ready. The colonial troops, resolute in purpose, embarked upon a siege of the French stronghold. Within the fortifications, Governor Daniel Dogger de Subercase led a valiant French garrison. Days turned to nights as the siege pressed on, the thud of cannonballs and the roar of muskets reverberating through the air. Amid the chaos, negotiations began. On a crisp October day, white flags of truce fluttered above the ramparts. Governor Subercase, recognizing the inevitable, surrendered. On October 5, 1710, the gates of Port Royal swung open, and the English entered victorious. The French colors lowered, replaced by the Union Jack. Acadia, once French, was now under English control. Annapolis Royal, it was named, a tribute to the Queen whose reign witnessed this turning point in history. As the war was ending, the Treaty of Utrecht was signed in the Netherlands, declaring King Philip V the rightful king of the Spanish throne. However, the other provision, the Asiento de Negros, gave the English immense economic power. For context, the Spanish were never really the people who went through the process of transferring enslaved people from Africa. Instead, they exported the labor of it in a monopoly called Asiento de Negros. Before the treaty, the French had the contract.